Hello, I'm Dawn Hurst. I'm the co-host of You Must Be Woking podcast. And I wanted to tell you about our exciting new series, You Must Be in the Spotlight. Don't worry, You Must Be Woking isn't going anywhere, but we have decided to launch a new series to run alongside it, where Craig and I are going to be joined by a series of wonderful guests in order to put a spotlight on a variety of topics and stories. Get ready for some unscripted, uncensored conversations, and they're going to ignite your curiosity and maybe even challenge your perspectives. So you never miss an episode. Make sure you're subscribed to You Must Be Woking, wherever you can get your podcasts.
Welcome back to You Must Be Menopausal. Don't worry, you haven't landed on the wrong podcast feed. This is our brand new In the Spotlight series that will run alongside our usual You Must Be Woking podcast. You Must Be in the Spotlight will be taking our same ethos of having honest and sometimes tough conversations and placing the spotlight on some wonderful guests who can help bring topics and insights to a whole new level. Today, Dawn and I are delighted to bring the topic of menopause into the spotlight with the rather fabulous Victoria Hardy, also known as Ginge Unhinged. Welcome.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
How you doing?
I'm really well, thank you.
Good. Welcome back, Dawn, as well.
Thank you. Good to be here. Nice to meet you.
And you?
Awesome. So we normally start these episodes with a news article. So I normally read something out from the news that's related to our topic. But today I thought we would read your description of your book.
Okay.
Because it made me laugh really loud when I read it. So I'm going to read it out to everybody else. So my audience were screaming for help with the menopause, and the medical jargon was as dry as my vagina. I'm embarrassed reading it.
Can you say vagina again, please?
Yeah.
It was as dry as my vagina.
Yay.
She says with a unique comical edge that her flabber is constantly gasted at the taboos still surrounding women. We need a Vulva revolution. Am I saying that wrong? Completely wrong. Victoria spent years with chronic illness, a way too long corporate wellbeing career. Then menopause came along surgically in her 30s, and she learned how important hormones are by completely losing her shit. So welcome.
Yeah, that's my life story.
Did we do justice to the intro? Does that work?
Yes, definitely. I love that you read that and that you said vagina.
I tried
and
my best.
revolution.
I said it with a hint of blush as I said it, though, I have to say.
Right,
You went
you're
all
the
coy
first.
then.
And I'm not shy at all, right? But today I am. So anyway, after that intro, where do we start? Welcome. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you and kind of how you got here and what you're doing? Because we're going to introduce the listeners to you and what you're up to and why menopause is important to you. But take us back a little bit. Tell us a little bit more about you.
Yeah, so I guess before I lost my shit and realised that I was smack bang in the middle of a menopause rather young, I was just, in the corporate world. I was raising 2 children and, married, living in London, living the life that you would expect. But I was doing it all alongside a chronic illness of endometriosis and adenomyosis. Okay. So I had that since I was really young, since my period started at 13. And it was just a constant battle of, trying to live your life whilst excruciating pain was kind of, dumbing down that life that I was trying to live. Wow. And I had 18 operations in total.
Wow.
Throughout my teenage years and my 20s, and lots of times where I wasn't listened to and, sort of fobbed off with the healthcare system, I guess. And I got to 32, just before I was sort of 33, and the pain was just really, really horrendous. It was really affecting my work. It was affecting, how I was parenting, how I was having my relationship at home. So I had a conversation about having a hysterectomy.
Wow.
And they put me onto a drug beforehand to kind of prepare me for that, which was a medical menopause, which they didn't tell me was a medical menopause. It was similar to a chemotherapy drug. But then 6 months later, I had my hysterectomy. I'd just turned 34. And then I was smack bang in the thick of it all without really any knowledge or know-how. And at the time, that was 7 years ago now, there was nobody talking about menopause really, let alone surgical menopause.
Yeah.
And then the rest is history, really. Created an account online to talk about it and share my mental health experience. And that grew, and hence the Ginge Unhinged.
I love that because I think I read somewhere about did your therapist recommend that you do journaling is how it started, right? Which is, I guess, the link to your book as well,
yeah,
right?
Definitely. So my hot therapist, Dr. John, who was my lifeline, and I have to really shout him out, actually. And I say this a lot because I say he was hot because he had this hot French name, and it wasn't hot, he was in retirement. But he was the first person to ever say surgical menopause to me. And that was 2 years after my surgery.
I'm going to be really ignorant here. I'm so sorry. What does that mean? Is it different to normal menopause?
It definitely is. I love that you asked that question. So if you think about the normal cycle, what we talk about menopause out there in the media and what we hear about, we hear a lot about perimenopause. So that would be the kind of biological state that a woman goes into. It can happen 10 to 12 years before the natural end to your periods. So menopause officially is when you haven't had a period for 12 consecutive months. Okay. And it's only one day. So it's like menopause one day. I like to say the before party is perimenopause. So that's when you're going to experience all the symptoms. You might want to go onto HRT and, things are starting to change. And then after that, you're postmenopausal. So when that's happening naturally, it is, it kind of ebbs and flows. I don't discredit how it feels, but it's kind of, you can feel better and then you can feel worse because your hormones are kind of doing a little bit of a dance.
Right.
When you have your ovaries removed, you are removing all of the estrogen in your body. And it's immediate and there's no going back. So not only are you faced with menopause symptoms like a smack in the face, there is no let up. It is lifelong. And then, of course, what that also comes with is fertility conversations. So if you're having surgery due to endometriosis or adenomyosis like me, or if it's cancer treatment or fibroids, this can happen at any age.
Wow.
So, there are young ladies, young women having this surgery, as early as sort of 18, 19 and onwards.
Wow.
So we're kind of living with that as a condition, I guess. So it is slightly different. Yeah, it has to be managed very differently.
Yeah. And you have no experience of that. So you're just kind of slung out there going, hey, you just had this massive surgery and here you are.
Yeah. So nobody kind of sat me down and said, this is what to expect. This is the symptoms that you're going to have. This is, what menopause feels like, but yours may be different and how you'll manage it. And of course, were you taught about menopause at school? Because I wasn't. So I had no clue. My mum didn't talk to me about her experience of menopause. So yeah, it was definitely a learn. But yeah, Dr. John, 2 years after my surgery, sat in his office, completely lost my mind and being treated for a mental illness, actually. He said, I think this is relating to your hormones and your surgical menopause. Wow. And he was the one that suggested that to reduce the stress, to reduce the kind of anxiety and depression that I was feeling, that I do something creative, that I journal out my feelings. And for me, writing was really cathartic. So that's where it started.
Love that.
And
And I think those symptoms are so underrated, aren't they?
Yeah.
They are literally life-changing. And that's just not discussed, is it?
Not at all. I think a lot of people assume, menopause is a hot flush here and there, or, brain fog even. But it can be really debilitating from a physical point of view and a mental point of view. So, if you're thinking about something like brain fog, brain fog and anxiety is actually, one of the top symptoms that most people complain about, how debilitating anxiety can be. Yeah. And then throw that in with complete memory loss. I mean, I forgot one of my friend's names and her name was Victoria. And, I can kind of laugh about it. But at the time, I thought I was going mad. How on earth was I going to manage meetings or my kids' schedules or just, times of things?
But it is massive, right? And part of the reason we were excited to have you on was because, a lot of our clients in the corporate world, menopause is becoming, shall we say, a more popular topic. People are taking it on in a different way, but not really in the workplace very well, would be my thing. And I'm coming at that from we're not doing it very well because there are male leaders like me out there who think, oh my God, am I really going to talk to somebody about their menopause? What on earth? But there's even a question from one of my team that came out today that says, how do I ask a member of my team if they need help to manage the menopause without making assumptions that they're actually experiencing it? And I was thinking, God, you probably speak for every man on the planet right now, right?
Yeah,
and not just
100%.
in the workplace, but outside the workplace. Every male out there would probably think something along those lines, how do you even broach that subject with somebody?
I think looking at it as a group rather than individually can be a good start. It's quite difficult to sit somebody down and go, so are you perimenopausal? Because, you might actually get smacked around the mouth if it's not. But, and that's a whole host of other issue in the workplace. But I think just having general conversations in your team about how people are feeling. If you're having good regular catch-ups with your team anyway, so whether that's through one-to-one conversations, whether that is, you're generally asking about, so how are things for you right now? Is there anything that you're struggling with work? Do we need to make any changes or adjustments for you? But you're doing that with everyone.
Yeah.
It doesn't always feel like it's singling out a person. So I always go back to what's the culture of the team or what's happening, monthly in those or weekly with those conversations, because then you can build, I guess, that safety to have to say, actually, God, I'm finding the office really hot right now, or actually, I don't know what it is. My anxiety is really spiking, and and it depends on the relationship with the person. We have to look really individually, but I think to not be too scared to approach it and, bring that conversation in, whether you can kind of say, oh, somebody I know is experiencing this, and kind of loop that in somehow, then, that person might turn around and be like, oh yeah, that's me. I'm going through it too. Or, I watched this program last night. It was really, interesting. Or I listened to this podcast, because my mum mentioned something, or, if you're a younger leader. So there's ways to do it. I think you just have to kind of try and be a little bit creative.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because before we were coming in to at the weekend, I had some family over, and I'm surrounded by women in my life. And so we were all around the table having a few drinks. And I said, oh, next week I'm doing this podcast with Victoria, and we're going to talk about the menopause. My God, the amount of things that just came out. And I was like, I didn't know you were on the menopause. I didn't know. I sat there quite amazed at some of the things they were saying about, the medications they've had to try and the trials they've had with this, whether it's a cream this and it's pills to that. And I just kind of sat there thinking, wow. And I know these people. Yeah. I spend a lot of time with these people, and I had no idea about half this, apart from the fact that my sister, every time she comes in my house, complains about how hot it is. But I just assume that's because I'm always cold and I always have the heating on.
But I think that's, yes, I think there's an element of male managers and leaders here having an issue. But I also think it's a difficult topic for some female to talk about too. I am of a totally different generation to you. And in my generation, we just didn't discuss this topic at all. I, in the early part of my career, didn't even tell people I had children because I had to be that alpha female to be able to progress. So the thought of then discussing this, even in a really safe environment, Craig and I have been together 20 years, and I had a complete meltdown one day over something that normally I would eat up and spit out. And I had to say to you, I'm menopausal. And you were like, oh, okay, yeah, but that's fine. And you were like, I couldn't work out why you were getting so stressed about this particular, and my anxiety just boiled over.
Yeah, I think you're so right that, and this is why it's really, there's no hard and fast answer. It's about learning who you're working with and, what makes that person tick and comfortable, and having, I guess, things in place already and knowledge, a little bit in your back pocket allows you to maybe not even directly approach them, but to make some adjustments around, and then allow them to come to you if need be. There's still a lot of stigma around it, for sure. It's much easier for somebody to say, can you open a window? I'm really experiencing a hot flush, rather than actually, I can no longer work in the position that I'm working or sitting in because I'm experiencing vaginal atrophy. I mean, you would literally be like, what now? So, there's the symptoms are so vast.
Yeah.
So just being aware of the symptoms, at least, of how it can affect somebody physically and mentally, then can make you a little bit more of a rounded leader to kind of, I guess, understand what that person might be experiencing.
Yeah.
There's some very interesting statistics, aren't there, about the proportion of women going through full menopause that are having to leave either senior roles or leave the workforce because it's so impactful on their lives. We, in the work we do, we are handling a number of cases of where that's had to be the outcome, which is right for the individual at their request. And that's even with the best will in the world and the best, adjustments in place. But it can be that debilitating, can't it?
Yeah. Work, relationship, divorce rates go up, suicide rates go up. And there's a lot of change happening all at once. And, of course, there are going to be elements as well, not to be on the too negative side, that some might experience this change, which is this little shift of energy as well, because there's a good side to menopause too, where they go, actually, maybe I want to do something different. Maybe there's a little bit more to me, or I've had enough of where I am. But a lot of people do feel like they just can't cope, or they can't, they can't be that in that alpha position that maybe they were in before, and they feel like they have to leave.
And that's a huge impact, though, for organizations who are already struggling for good talent, right? That talent feels it needs to leave or move on because we're not creating an environment where they feel comfortable enough to stay. Like, that's quite scary, right?
But I also think that's as a result of not being creative as well, isn't it? Looking at a career-long life plan of what that might look like, and the ebbs and flows of part-time and stepping down to step back up, and all of those things can really support.
And we have seen some organizations be really creative with some of that stuff. So where they, provide different roles, or you can go and shadow and do a different role if you fancy something new, or you can, do part-time hours if you wanted to go off and play trumpet in the park or whatever. We've seen it with, the gig economy. That's becoming quite a thing now, where people are being much more flexible in the way they structure their roles so that people can do the things that they really care about. So it can apply both ends of the spectrum, I suppose.
But we should also tell you about some of the not so great things we've seen as well. And I think my favourite, because I was conscious of not taking up too much of your time to talk, but the best I saw was a logistics company who had rolled out a 20-week training program on the menopause. And one of the hour-long modules was on vaginal dryness, and they insisted on every staff member of this logistics company attending the meeting. Oh. And if there was anything to take this topic back 300 years, it was that session.
Yeah. I mean, you can literally cover the subject in quite nicely in 5 minutes, and get the key points across to what it might feel like, and then let those that might be experiencing then connect and, get together on that level, and share knowledge and share what they've tried. And that's the beauty of starting these conversations and then allowing your workplace to kind of grow them kind of organically, I guess, and make those connections with themselves. But yeah, that's just, I mean, they really went for it, didn't they?
They really went for it, and they didn't like my challenge for really going for it. But I had tens and tens of men come to talk to me to say, I was fully supportive and now I'm feeling uncomfortable. And it is that fine line, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I always find when I go into workplaces, and schools as well, I do talks with teachers, and it's actually a lot of the time the guys that come up to me afterwards that talk to me more than the women, actually. The women, I think, will then talk to themselves. They might say, oh, I'll have a look at your book, or they might have a specific question. Yeah. But it's the guys that come up and say, wow, I learned so much, but you did it in a way that was kind of, hit the nail on the head. You got to the point, and it was, a little bit of a laugh as well. But they spot things. They'll say, I've noticed from what you've said, I've noticed that my wife or my partner is going through that. Or if they, I've had younger lads come up to me saying, I think my mum's going through the perimenopause, and I'm like, okay, what are you going to do about that then? And they're like, I'm going to be a little bit nicer, but it's just making them, but to throw all of the information all at once, it's even over 20, I don't think anybody can
master's
really.
Degree
That's a master's degree. I think those people probably walked out knowing more than actual GPs.
So I was looking at your book at the weekend as well, but prior to you coming in, I can't say I understood a whole lot of it. Some of the things I thought were really cool. So I really like so I'm going to phrase what I think you're saying, and then you can tell me whether I've got it completely wrong or whether I'm right. But I think what you're saying to people in your book, or through this, giving them this opportunity to is it's about, a lot of it's about well-being, and it's about protecting your own well-being. So there's some really good tips in there for people who are obviously going through the menopause and stuff. But actually, I liked some of the tips in there that I thought could easily transfer to the workplace as well. So, some of the things that I think you should tell us about was your kind of 12+1 rule. I thought that was pretty cool. And the fuck it bucket as well, which was also really quite cool.
Everyone loves the fuck it bucket.
So, but I thought these kind of things are just really good ways to kind of take away that stigma. And that's why we really liked your approach, because your whole thing for us was about, let's take away this stigma. It doesn't need to be there. There's people that need some support in a really good way. And you do that in such a nice way that makes people feel quite relaxed, to the point where I then felt relaxed sitting there reading your book and asking my family and friends about the topic at the weekend, which I probably wouldn't have done before I picked up your book or thought about this. So I think that's really cool. So tell us a little bit more about that bit in your book.
Yeah, so and you've really hit it there. I wanted it to be a book that the reader owns. So there's a lot of books out there that are full of the medical stuff, or written by doctors, or or celebrities that are sharing their experience and sharing those stories. And although that book has my story in it, and it has the beautiful words of lots of different people experiencing, for me, it was about the person owning their experience. Because really and truly, we can have all of the information in the world, but we don't necessarily have a healthcare system that is going to be tip-top all the time, that's supportive. And things go wrong at home and things go wrong at work. And it's always coming back to self. So the point of journaling and working through the 12 rules is really around making sure that you can take some tips and try them. You'll find what works for you. Some things don't. I share in there some of the things I tried that don't work for me. But really just explore and be curious about getting your body right, getting your mind right, but also getting your soul right, and allowing yourself to go through that experience in whatever way you have menopause. I wanted to put tips in there that kind of anybody can do. I think a lot of those you could pick out and put into another book and not necessarily have, be in menopause. So that just allows you to do them whether or not it's with your children at home or with your partner at home. And, journaling out as you go is so important. It's really about then kind of reviewing and looking back and saying, well, this was my experience at the time and this is how I've moved forward. The fuck it bucket, or burning your fucks, as I say, is really about letting go.
Okay.
So, and how you would bring that into the workplace, I talk about it as this sort of special ritual that we do around a fire. It sounds all a bit very woo-woo, but essentially it's writing down whatever you feel you need to get off of your chest. Now, that could be that you're feeling a particular way about somebody at work, if you're putting it into the workplace, or maybe a system has changed, or maybe you're just feeling like you can't cope right now and, you're beating yourself up that you don't feel like you're enough to be in the team that you're in, or, you're not putting in for the targets, whatever it is. You can put that stuff down on paper. Physically, pen to paper is really important because there's, something scientific around, the nervous system about when you're actually writing something out.
Okay.
And get rid of it.
Yeah.
So, say it out loud, acknowledge it, and then either physically burn it, rip it up, scream at it as you're doing it. But it's about getting out your system and just acknowledging it. Because a lot of the time we hold so much inside and it molds over and it gets worse in our brains. And we might write that email and we might send that email and then we hugely regret sending that email. So it's about writing it out and allowing yourself to kind of think and feel it and go, okay, that's all good. And then you can kind of come back to, right, what do I actually need to take action on? And it's about action, essentially.
Love that. Love it. And you're right. A lot of that stuff you can transfer to well-being in general, right? Can't you? It doesn't have to be specific to the menopause.
And I think we talk a lot about feelings and about well-being, but we don't acknowledge how we feel. It's all about kind of like, try and de-stress, or, I'm a massive advocate for mindfulness and being present and trying to bring yourself back to the moment, and bringing in joy. Huge advocate of joy and doing things, finding the glimmers, because you can de-stress, you can really reduce stress, which is going to impact anxiety, depression, etc. by doing that. But we ignore the other stuff. We ignore the fact that we do get really angry, that we do have these rageful moments, whether or not we're in menopause or whether we're just experiencing life's shit, right?
Yeah.
So by being allowed to kind of express that in a way that's safe and, isn't going to harm anybody else, you can get that stuff off your chest and I think recenter yourself and a little bit more. Nice.
Love that. So tell us a little bit about the language bit that you're bringing in, because again, I think that was a big thing for me, like reading that intro.
You mean the bad language?
Well, no, but I think that,
I'm a bit potty mouth.
Talking about or saying words that you wouldn't normally be comfortable with. I read that intro from your book at the beginning.
Yeah.
And I could feel myself burning up as I was doing it, right? The awkwardness that comes from that.
What was it you said again? What was it you said?
Just remind us.
Just remind us what the word was.
Vaginal dryness, I think, was the key
Nice.
word.
Vaginal dryness. It's okay. It's so interesting, isn't it? Because we'll literally say hand, or we'll say elbow, or we'll say hair or eyes. But we have so much shame over our own bodies, and women particularly have a lot of shame over understanding what their bodies are. We only have learnt that our body parts do certain things. I could go out onto the street and ask 20 women, and I guarantee that there'll be quite a lot of them that wouldn't be able to tell the difference between their vagina and their vulva. And we get so embarrassed about the words. But it's so important that we know them, because for our health, for, to make sure that we're looking after ourselves, and also for our future children, in terms of, being safe and safeguarding, that we own these words and that there isn't this stigma around them. So, yeah, I really wanted to bring that in, and I do kind of shout that from the rooftops in my revolvolution, as I call it.
Love that.
Because, we shouldn't feel that shame.
I feel like I should ask the question. So as a gay man, I have very little experience in this space. But what is the difference between the two then? So tell us.
So the vulva is the outside.
Right.
And the vagina is the inside.
Okay.
So, yeah. But there's a lot of even doctors and medical professionals that I see that are interviewed on podcasts, that are on TV, they will still talk about the vagina as the whole thing. And it's like, it's not the whole thing. We need to understand that there's a difference. There is vaginal cancers and there is vulva cancer, for example. So there's really important that we understand what that difference is so that we know what's going on with our own bodies.
Wow.
So yeah, vulva's the outside. That's the real easy way to remember it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Duly noted.
But again, it's this level of basic intervention that we don't talk about, isn't it? That's fascinating that so many people don't. I had a moment of going, am I thinking of it the right way round? But yeah, that's good. I know what's what.
Yeah. And I didn't know until a lot later. And it hasn't been in medical books. And, it still is getting, misinterpreted. So it is really important. And I think that comes from the history of medical research being a lot on men and not on women, and these words not being allowed into medical reports and books until we're talking, the early 2000s.
Wow, really?
It was only in recent years that they realised that the clitoris has 10,000 nerve endings. So, that's... we've all been sitting here.
Aren't you all lucky?
We are. And do you know what? They're all for pleasure.
There's many things that could be said at this.
There is many things. But that, we have literally all been sitting there with this little kind of nerve explosion and not really understanding that because there's a level of why that wasn't put in medical books before. So, of course, there is this kind of turnaround, which is really great to see. But on a serious level, from a wellbeing perspective and understanding your own body, we need to know this stuff and have less shame about naming those body parts.
Yeah, because when we were talking about the pod and preparing for today, you talked quite a lot about, you being from that generation that didn't talk about this topic a lot either. And then, Victoria, you talk about, I have this whole kind of audience that is desperate for more information. But you also acknowledge, actually, there's another generation coming through who want 10 times more knowledge about everything, right?
Goodness.
So and we know that from the workplace already because we see that in the way they behave, the way they act, the things they're demanding from leaders, actually. So you've almost got, I don't want to say 3 generations because it's probably more than that, but 3 big sections of society there don't talk, need some help, and then you've got this younger generation who probably know more about everything and anything than anybody else anyway.
They're so ready, and that's I write about that in my book actually, that I feel like as a millennial I'm this sort of one in the middle that my mum and the generation before didn't really talk about it, maybe starting to a little bit more now with media. But then you've got sort of the millennials that are then bringing up the next generation of social media where we're learning for the first time as parents to try and do all of that. And then you've got this next generation that have access to everything on social media pretty much. And they are so ready for the conversation. I've got a nearly 19-year-old daughter. I've got a 15-year-old son, and they both very much know about, women's health and their own bodies and what to expect on all aspects. But they're curious to know, I think.
Nice.
I mean, they don't like it when I talk about it and dance in my kitchen online. I'm highly embarrassing. But, actually deep down under that, then there's that sensitivity, particularly, for example, with my son, who I know there's that sensitivity for girls and their periods and, his friendship group, which exists of girls, there's not necessarily that stigma.
Well, we did a on our previous episode, we talked about the hit show adolescence and boys, and we were talking about this kind of younger generation in that, and the language they use where like we wouldn't understand it, and in the show they didn't understand it, that kind of stuff. And it is so important. It frightened the life out of me. I've got a 12-year-old boy who's just started high school, and I think, oh my God, like it's so scary. But I'm always constantly saying to him things like, you need to ask permission. Like if you're going to hug somebody, you need to ask before you can do that. And so I'm trying to teach him these things as he's growing up, because the world's really different, isn't it? And they're experiencing it in a different way. But it frightens me constantly. And we've talked about it on that show when we talked about adolescence, because it kind of brought it up loud, didn't it? But there's a role for boys here as well, right? And in this too.
Yeah, sure. And I think, these boys have got sisters and mums experiencing it, and we'll have, wives and girlfriends and just friends, that are going to go through this. And I think, but it starts with understanding that there isn't the shame around bodies. Yes, when we're exploring, there needs to be consent and things need to be done in the right way. But actually, as humans, that there shouldn't be this kind of shame around it, particularly around periods and menstrual cycles and, their feelings towards girls. I think how that is kind of taught in schools has a lot to be said for kind of what then comes after. And that's the slight issue, is that we need to get that bit right.
Absolutely. And it's under attack at the minute as well, isn't it? Sex education in schools as well, because they were teaching LGBT education in schools. There's been big cases in the Midlands about whether or not that's appropriate. And so it just brings the whole, I feel like it takes sex education backwards when we keep having these incidents in the media.
And what we don't talk about with sex education is we talk about not getting pregnant. So how you avoid getting pregnant. But we don't talk about fertility. So, there's a lot of, if you think about the statistics of endometriosis and then, of course, adenomyosis and then early onset cancers, those statistics are increasing, which is a shame. But we're not educating girls and boys to say, actually, this is how you avoid getting pregnant when you don't want to. But also, it's really important that you understand that pregnancy is not plain sailing, and actually menstrual cycles are not plain sailing. There are these health issues as well, so that they understand by the time they get to, late teens, early 20s, should they have any of those issues, that they've got that education and they know what they're going to do. Because again, that's something I didn't know.
And you're relying on other sources, because the parental or grandparental generation can't provide those answers. So it's got to come from somewhere.
Yeah. And it will come from YouTube or TikTok.
Yeah.
Well, TikTok.
And then what type of content
and then
are they
getting?
Exactly.
Yeah, there's so much misinformation.
Wow. Okay. So you go into schools a bit, right? And workplaces, and you talk about this sort of stuff. Talk me through, maybe not the school bit, but if you went into a workplace, what does that look like for you then? Because I guess one of the things we're really keen to do is to take the work that you're doing and kind of shine a light on that, so that workplaces that we're used to working with on a regular basis through our own practice, they hear this and they can see it. And so tell me a little bit about what would happen in a Victoria Hardy session.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, a Victoria Hardy session would probably look slightly different to some of the other menopause sessions out there, like the 20-week programme where we're going to spend an hour on vaginal dryness. So how I go in and talk to businesses, it will be dependent. I'll either do an awareness session for everybody, and everybody is welcome.
Nice.
Or a support session for a particular a group of people experiencing menopause. Or it might be that I'm going in to speak to leaders, or maybe doing a little bit of work around how they're communicating and engaging their colleagues, and making sure that things are inclusive on those levels. But generally, if I was talking about an awareness session, for example, so first of all, I always say, everybody is welcome in the room. And it's really important for me that right at when it's communicated out to everybody, it's communicated out to everybody in terms of, there's no age bracket here.
Yeah.
There's no gender bracket here. We have, experience of people transitioning, for example, that are going to be on hormones, that are going to be experiencing, their version of menopausal symptoms. We've got early premature ovarian insufficiency. So that could be your, as young as 17, 18-year-olds that are working in your workplaces, as well as obviously the guys that are supporting women that are going through it. So everybody is welcome in the room. And I really do just cover off the symptoms. I'll go through why it's important to be talking about it in the workplace and giving some kind of communication tips, I suppose, and how you can kind of, I guess, pocket up. But it's done with a lot of humour. So I always call myself I suppose, a comedic educator. So it's a little bit like stand-up education, if you could imagine that. So we do get everybody in the room shouting vulva. And I start with my personal story, but that's, told in a way that, we have everybody laughing. So it kind of eases the mood a little bit.
Yeah.
But without missing out the important points of, actually how bad I did feel at one point. And where I did go for help and the things that could, where I found that community and support. So it's really important for me to kind of wave the humour through, but to get key messages across that this actually is really impactful for people, both physically and mentally. And how it affects both sides. So, and when I talk about both sides, it's very generic of me, but, actually when we're talking about how the women are feeling in the workplace, but also that there are nuances with men experiencing midlife changes as well. We have andropause, if you want to kind of name it officially. But, historically a midlife crisis that would have been called, your hormones are changing too. So we try and bring together those nuances that creates a little bit more empathy in the workspace.
Nice.
Because really it's about listening to each other and understanding, how you can connect and find not your differences, but find your, commonalities together.
Love that. I feel like you need to say the word vulva now, really loud.
Vulva.
I've said it. There you go. It's just me that went red then. Okay, so I've been asking some of the questions as we go along. So I gathered some questions before you came in today from my team, and we also put some things out on the socials. So I'm just going to check if there's anything we haven't covered. Oh, this I thought was a good one. You did talk about it a little bit earlier on because you talked about adjustments, but is the menopause considered to be a disability? I thought that was a really good question, actually.
So it is classed as a disability under I'm going to have to get it right now.
Act.
Yes, under the Equality Act, fairly recently. So, and there was a lot of hoo-ha about that actually in the media from menopausal women saying it's not a disability, but it had to be classed as that in order to be protected.
Yeah.
So, yes, under the Act, so that it's protected in the workplace, it is classed as a disability. However, there's probably not going to be many. Again, I speak for the masses, maybe. Many menopausal women, you may disagree, that says that they want to be classed as, that it's going to be a long-term disability. Some, of course, it's slightly different. For me, it's lifelong. So, I have to manage that in that way. But it protects it. And I think what we need to do is it gives it the severity of actually it's very impactful. It's impactful like a chronic illness and a disability would be, whether it's you're experiencing it for 10 years or 12 months.
That sparked me to remember something that my sister was telling me at the weekend, was that she thought she was done with the menopause. And then her boss said to her the one day, because she'd had the conversation with her boss and, it was fine. And then the boss said to her the one day, "Are you okay?" And she's like, "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm really tired." And he said, "Okay, do you need me to do anything?" Being really supportive of her. And then when she went home and she told her girlfriends about it, they said to her, "You might want to go and get a blood test." And so I was then, why would you need a blood test? What does a blood test do? And apparently it's something about I can't even remember what she said now, but the ending of menopause, post-menopause, there you go. And again, like that was like a whole new world to me, but even to her, right?
Yeah.
So as the female going through it, she was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
She thought she was done.
Yeah.
But even that's not the end, is it?
And it's not the end. So
Yeah.
the symptoms can, for some people, go on post-menopause.
Quite.
And again, so we get this big thing of like, oh yeah, we're going to, periods are going to stop and it's all going to be amazing. But yeah, for some, so it's really individualized.
And I guess that leans to your point about that disability bit, right? Is because, for her, she's been really lucky. She's had an employer who's really supportive and has helped and all of that good stuff. She's a bit of a doer anyways, my sister. So she's, she tries not to be, but it's been difficult for her. And she was openly telling me about that at the weekend. But for some people, it's a completely different story. And I think that's what I really like about your style is you don't preach to people that it'll be this way or it's that thing. What you say to people is it's going to be different for everybody.
It is, yeah. And that's why it's really important to connect to yourself in it, because we get so bombarded with what to, whether to be on HRT, whether not to be, to buy this product, to do this, to eat this food, to take this supplement. It is literally being thrown at us now because, of course, it's a huge, a huge money maker because women are, and those experiencing really want to feel better. But, if you can learn what kind of ebbs and flows with and realize that, okay, it might be for the long haul, but but you can learn to manage things, or at least, I guess I'm trying to say is manage your physical and mental well-being. There's so much that you can do as you go along, and the tools that you'll build, they will be your rules. They will work for you. So,
nice.
It's about being curious with yourself, I think, and
Love that.
whether you're going to experience it into your 80s or not. But mine's for life. But I've got my toolbox in place to know that if the anxiety comes or the brain fog comes, of what I can manage, takes that pressure off, I think.
Nice. Love that. Shall we do a so what then? So we're conscious that we've talked about some of the things that can be done for individuals, but also the workplace. Let's just talk a little bit about what workplaces can or can think about in this space. Any top tips that we want to kind of end this session with for workplaces to say, okay, this is happening to lots of women, whether you're aware of it or not. Let's have that conversation about what could and should they be thinking about doing. So I'm throwing this open to both of you to come up with some tips for people.
Sure, you far away.
So I think for me, some of the biggest ones are so workplaces love statistics, right? And we alluded to statistics at the beginning. So we hear that 13 million women in the UK are currently menopausal a lot, or you'll get 1 billion women by, well, we're in 2025 now, are menopausal. So I think one of the biggest things that I always say to workplaces are you need to broaden your lens. The statistics that you see are far greater than, what gets shared. One, they're kind of slightly outdated, and they are only looking at an age range of between 45 and 52, which is the average range in the UK at the moment for menopause. Now, obviously, I experienced it at 33. We know that girls are experiencing it from their early teens, and some people will experience it in their 60s. So the range is a lot broader. So I think whenever you're approaching this subject, before you even kind of start to think about, well, what should I say? Think about how or who you're going to be talking to. So this is about talking to all age ranges, talking to, anybody that could be experiencing menopausal symptoms, as I mentioned before, and really bringing that sort of lens in. So, if you're in a large business, for example, and you've got networks, then it's a really good thing to talk within the networks to see how they can come together. So is it, how is it affecting your LGBT network, for example? Or, if you've got a, maybe an Asian network, for example, within your organization, these are the nuances that within menopause are really different within communities or how people are going to be feeling and what they're experiencing. So bringing that diversity around kind of when you're communicating out is really, really a big one for me, because it drives me mad that I constantly see, just kind of let's only invite a certain age range of ladies around the table.
Something I've seen a lot of is that, people get referred to the employee assistance program through their private healthcare provider or their wellbeing provider. But actually the menopause module that's available isn't part of the standard package.
Yeah.
And so few employers actually pay for that bit.
Yeah.
So in comparison, it's pennies, but it would make such a massive difference.
A huge
Access to absolute menopause experts, the best doctors, et cetera, and just speed that whole process.
Yeah, and it makes so much sense, because if you can get, your workforce in, supported around the mental health side, for example, which you would do if it was classed as a mental ill, So if you were, I'm suffering with anxiety and depression, well, that's great. Go and have some therapy.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm experiencing menopause, which happens to be giving me. Oh no, we don't cover that. So it's, but actually you've got that kind of like, well, let's deal with that as well. Let's also make sure that our, physically, we've got DEXA scans being covered. Osteoporosis is, a risk of menopause, and let's look at that. And then also, of course, if you can get the medication that you need or the complementary therapies that you need that are recommended to you by doctors, if you can get those quicker through your private healthcare, it's a game changer. I mean, why wouldn't you?
And I think that whole piece around medication is massive, isn't it? And, whether that be in the workplace or whether that be general, the fear around some of that medication is huge and real. And also contributory factors, weight, etc.
Yeah.
All of those impact the result of some of those very effective. And then, of course, for some people, it has no impact, and the opposite. For me, my story on HRT was that it sent me wappy, and it didn't help at all. Quite the opposite. So, it's a big topic.
Yeah, and I think if we can have policies being used appropriately would be nice. So we know that menopause policies are coming in, and everyone's like, that's great, they've got a menopause policy. And I'm like, okay, how often do you refer to your menopause policy when you're putting change in place in your business? So, if you're designing, you just mentioned weight gain there, if you're designing a whole new uniform for your workforce, are you referring to the menopause policy on about what fabrics you might want to choose, or what designs you might want to have, or what your protocol is around how often that is replaced, and whether or not somebody's going to feel awful that they're walking around in something that's way too tight or bloating their stomach out, for example. We do it for maternity. So let's, kind of refer back to those policies. That's what they're there for when change is happening within your business.
Love that.
And I think you make a really interesting point about things like menopause policies and period policies. I know certainly not that many years ago, I was one of those female leaders who went, what a load of fluff. We're not doing that. That's just ridiculous. We don't do that. But certainly have seen the impact of that, having experienced that myself and having had the opportunity to use some of that advice.
Yeah.
I genuinely, the thought wouldn't have crossed my mind. I was sat here as you were talking about the uniform policy, and we do that quite a lot, right? So we work with organizations on, setting up new sites, premises, and doing the inclusion lens over the top of it. And we talk about uniform and female uniform and male uniform, and making sure that they are available in the right sizes, and not asking everybody to use unisex jackets that are just too big for women, etc., and gloves, etc.
Yeah.
But I would not have thought to cross-check that with the menopause policy, because I wouldn't have given that a single thought. I genuinely wouldn't. So my bad. I will make sure I do that in future, because I wouldn't have.
And I think that's policies in general, just thinking back and saying, well, why did we put that policy in place? Did we put it in place because we had to tick a box because someone's telling us that we had to? Or do we put it in place because it's there as a tool to use when we're creating change? And the same for, when we're communicating with our colleagues is, is referring back to those guidelines, and that, if you're not sure, is that's why they're there in place. And generally they've been written, especially in larger organisations, normally with the lens of actually somebody that's experiencing it maybe have had looked, because they're normally driven by those people in the first place.
And I think that's a really interesting point you make there, because I've seen that both work and be a disaster. So you've got the highly militant menopausal female driving the menopausal policy, and you can see their colleagues are petrified. Whereas I've also seen it done in a much more balanced way, and it's embedded much better. But I've gone head to head with several menopause policy experts who are interesting.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I guess we're learning, right, aren't we? We're not going to get it perfect, and it's not being afraid to go there.
Yeah.
Like, you started off right at the beginning by saying vagina, and you weren't afraid to go there. And, it's...
I was a little bit afraid.
You were a little bit afraid, but you did it. And now maybe you're slightly less uncomfortable. But there's so much fear around this.
Yeah.
And there's so much fear of, am I going to say the wrong thing? Am I going to do the wrong thing? Oh my goodness, is in the Equality Act now. Like, what? We have to, on both sides, relax a bit and say, actually, we're just learning about this. This is really new.
Okay.
It's okay. We're going to make mistakes, and be transparent in those communications. And actually, I think then that just kind of has a little bit more of a nurturing culture.
Nice. Love that. Okay, I've got one more question for you. And this is a question that we're going to ask all of our guests on the Spotlight series. So you're the first one to answer this question. It's called My First Boss. We've all had them. We all remember them. Some of us may even still be friends with them. Some of us probably not. But if you were going to give your first boss a bit of advice going into the workforce today, what would you tell them? It's 2025. What would you say to that person if they were starting out in the workforce today?
So I do remember my first boss.
Okay.
I won't name her. And she had a profound impact on me, probably for a negative reason.
Okay.
So I was 16 and sort of, fresh and, off the cuff, ready to go. And I remember her saying to the words to me that you will never become ... the job that I was going to do, because there was a protocol to go through, and I was a bit of a rule breaker, and I was like, well, I don't want to go and do that, follow that, because I really feel that I can go from here to here. So, and I did, and I then went on and actually became the job role that she said I never would, and I did it at one of the youngest ages in the country. I would say to her coming in now to always broaden your lens to who you've got in front of you and to what is possible with the team that you have around you. I think we can get so stifled in to those roots or, again, those boxes that we get put in. So it really ties into, I guess, what I deal with now is that I get put into a certain box and I'm not in that box.
Yeah.
But, if we can have a little bit more possibility thinking around who's actually working and what they're going through or what they're capable of at the point that they are, then who knows what could happen.
Love that.
Yeah, that's what I would tell her now.
Love that.
I don't know if that was the right answer.
No, it's no right or wrong answer. But love your insight. Love it. Okay, we are now on to our recurring feature, and I believe you've been prepped in advance for this. This is the woke or joke section of the podcast, where you are going to give us a woke or joke, and we've got to decide whether it's true, it's woke, or false, it's a joke.
Okay, is it woke or joke that a gift bag designed for menopausal women working at Vanti West Coast was out with the bag containing items such as a fan for hot sweats, a jelly baby in case you feel like biting someone's head off, a paper clip so you can help keep it all together, and a tissue, if you're feeling a bit emotional, and even a pencil to write things down that you might forget. Do we think that is woke?
Oh my God.
Or is that a joke?
It's got to be a joke.
It's not a
Please,
joke.
God, let it be a joke.
Sadly, it's not a joke.
It is not a joke.
No.
They actually did that, yeah.
I'm useless at this woke or joke thing, by the way, right? I get pretty much everyone.
But I can see why you think it was it the jelly baby that did it?
It was the paperclip. If somebody gave me a paperclip and told me to keep it all together, I think I'd flick it at them.
You'd be undoing it.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
But did you know that?
I did know that.
Okay.
Only as you were describing it, I remember the case because it went viral, didn't it?
It went massively viral, and it was massive news. LinkedIn exploded over it. But I must say, actually, that they really took on the feedback very quickly and actually got menopause experts in to speak to their leadership team and to actually roll out something that was quite helpful.
Fair play
So
to them.
it was, so they definitely turned it around quite quickly.
We've seen a lot of those faux pas, haven't we? But well intended, but okay, very good. Well, thank you for taking part in our woke or joke, and thanks so much for coming on. It's been really, really insightful. Tell us if people want to buy your book or get in touch with you to do talks at their workplaces or in their schools. How do they do that?
Okay, so I am Victoria Hardy on LinkedIn. Let's get that one out because I always forget. But I'm also Ginge Unhinged. And I'm on gingeunhinged.com, obviously, and on Instagram, and I'm on TikTok as well. And the book is available on the website as well.
Amazing. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us. And You Must Be in the Spotlight. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely. Great to meet you.
Thank you so much. And I think we should all say vulva before we end.
Let's
1, 2, 3. Vulva!
Thank you. Thank you for watching and listening. If you liked our discussions and our content, why not leave us a review? And so we can reach even more listeners. Also, don't forget to hit the subscribe or the like buttons and the follow buttons on anywhere you get your podcasts from. You can also find us on all the social media platforms at You Must Be Woking, or just search hashtag YMB Woking, where you can continue the conversation and get involved in the chat after the show.